I've been monitoring the Park Place Technologies global VPN services using Ensurity Network Analytics, or ENA, for the past few days. We have several Cisco ASA firewalls distributed around our global offices, and you can see on this dashboard that the number of active VPN sessions rises significantly during the working day. If you look closely, you'll notice that the top 3 lines representing 3 different VPN devices in the USA Eastern time zone have a different working day when compared with the next 2 lines that show the VPN sessions in use in the UK and Singapore. If you look closely at the yellow line, you'll see that it's hitting a limit of 300 sessions during several of the days. In this video, I'm going to demonstrate how VPN session count statistics can be gathered from devices that support VPN communications. There's a second video that explains how these metrics can be used to populate additional dashboards. One of the primary concerns of organizations who have recently shifted significant numbers of staff from working in offices that are directly connected to their main network to working from home is the load on the corporate VPN devices. Many VPN devices have a limit to the number of simultaneous VPN sessions that can be supported. In some cases, this limit is based on the size of a license purchased from the equipment vendor. If the maximum number of sessions allowed is known, monitoring the number of VPN sessions over the course of the day allows an accurate assessment of whether more sessions are needed and whether the current limitation has already been reached. Once the number of sessions has hit the maximum number allowed, further attempts to establish new sessions will be rejected. For this example, I've already taken a Cisco ASA under management. I'm going to show how 2 new attributes can be added that will show the current number of active sessions and the maximum number of sessions that's allowed. These are instrumented in an SNMP MIB called the Cisco Remote Access Monitor MIB. I've logged in as an administrator and can now select the user-defined polling page from the administration page. I'll use the user-defined polling wizard to step me through the process of adding the first new attribute, which is going to hold the current number of VPN sessions that have been established. On my ENA system, this device is called Cisco ASA. So I can search for it simply using ASA. I'll select it, and that will allow me to explore its MIB contents in the next step. The Cisco Remote Access Monitor MIB isn't already loaded, so I'll go ahead and import it. I'll now try to load this newly imported MIB. You'll see that it didn't parse correctly, but the problem is clearly that a dependent MIB is missing. I'll import that MIB and perform the load operation again. This time the Cisco Remote Access Monitor MIB parsed without a problem, and you'll see up here that it's now marked as having been loaded. When I close the Manage MIBs dialog, the new branch in the MIB browser tree is visible. The MIB object that I'll need to select is called CRAS-num sessions, which I can search for by entering it up here. You'll see it highlighted in the tree, and its full description taken from the MIB file is displayed below. As the device is already under management, I can issue an SNMP GET for its contents. This device is currently supporting 238 VPN sessions. I can now move on to the next step. This is where a new attribute will be added to the data model for the device. I'll leave the attribute name unchanged, but modify the display name, as this is how the attribute will be listed in the UI. I'll use Sessions for Remote Access as its new display name. The description field has already been filled in from the details in the MIB, so I'll leave it alone. This device has been classified as a high availability firewall, or firewall device HA. I could leave this untouched, which will allow it to be used for polling other firewall device HA devices. But I'm going to modify that setting to be a firewall device instead, which includes the firewall HA device type. As this is a Cisco device, the filter has been automatically pre-configured to only allow Cisco devices to be supported by this new attribute. If you only have firewalls from one vendor, this can be left untouched. However, I'm going to make this applicable to all firewall vendors by modifying the filter to ignore the device vendor code. I'll do this by selecting Cisco from the enterprise list, which is populated with all of the device vendors currently under management on this ENA server. Clicking the Remove button deletes the Cisco clause from the filter expression syntax below. The MIB defined the OID as a gauge which holds an integer, so these are the defaults that have been adopted and I won't need to change them. However, I'm going to change the polling interval to 15 minutes and the retention period to 5 weeks. If you choose a different polling period, the range of retention options will also be adjusted. As the incoming integer data will not need to be interpreted or modified, I don't need to select a transform. This is all that needs to be configured to define the attribute, which represents how the data will be stored in the database. Let's move on to the next step, where the way in which the data will be gathered will be specified. This is the collector definition. The name, description, object type, and attribute are already defined from the previous step. The OID that I located using the MIB browser is now displayed, and as this is a scalar, which means it isn't part of a table, I don't need to select an index for it. I'll leave the default v2 setting for the SNMP version, but it's worth noting that this would be ignored if the device were to be managed using SNMP v3. The method syntax has been auto-generated and controls how the SNMP get operation will be issued. I won't need to make any changes to this. The filter syntax will cause this collector to be used only if the device is manufactured by Cisco. You can have multiple collectors defined for the same attribute, which is how different OIDs are used for the same information gathered from different vendor MIBs. The priority setting controls which collector will be tested first at runtime when there are multiple collectors with valid filters. But as I'm only going to be creating this single collector, I don't need to be concerned with this in this example. Finally, I'm not going to need to make any changes to the incoming data, so I'll leave the transform set to none. That's all there is to it. There's a second attribute that I want to add, which will hold the maximum number of VPN sessions that this device can have active at any one time. The procedure to add this is the same, although I won't need to import and load the MIB as that's already been taken care of. The OID is called CRAS Max Sessions Supportable. In my case, it's returning 300, so the device is not yet maxed out on sessions. I'll use Sessions Maximum Supportable as its display name, and make the same adjustments that were made for the other attribute. Once more, no changes are necessary for the collector, so I'll click Finish. I'm going to create one more attribute, but this time I won't use the wizard. This attribute is going to show the current session count as a percentage of the maximum number of sessions allowed. In the Attributes tab, I'll add a new attribute and select the same ASA device again. I'll give the attribute a suitable name, beginning with UD. In this case, it'll be UD underscore % max supportable. I'll give it a suitable display name, and I could put a description in as well. Once again, this is going to be for a firewall device, and I'll remove the dependency on it being Cisco. The display format I'll choose will be percentage with 2 decimal places. And I'll choose float 64 as the data type. I'll set the polling interval once more to 15 minutes and the retention period to 5 weeks. And that'll match the other 2 attributes I've already created. In the Collectors tab, I'll add a new collector and select that same device again. I'll define the name of the collector. I'm using the same name that was used for the attribute. All it needs to be is unique among the collectors. However, the attribute here, I'll need to choose from the menu. Don't assume that the default is appropriate. The OID and index aren't relevant as I'm going to be defining the method syntax myself. The logic for computing the percentage needs to be defined in the method. This uses similar syntax that was auto-generated for the methods in the previous 2 collectors to gather the details from the device using SNMP, but this time store it in named variables that are then used to compute the current session count as a percentage of the maximum. It also includes a test to protect it from performing a divide by 0. To make it easier to read the syntax, I'll zoom in. You may want to pause the video at this point to copy down the syntax. All 3 required attributes have now been added, so let's go and see what values they're returning in the attributes dashboard of the device. They all have sessions in the name, so I can filter for those attributes. You'll notice that each attribute appears twice. This is because user-defined attributes can be used as both object attributes and time series attributes. When you select the version that doesn't have a stream name, it will behave as an object attribute that only shows the latest gathered data sample. If the version with the stream name is chosen, then all the historic data samples will be available. The session count and maximum are what we saw in the MIB earlier, and the percentage is being correctly computed. There's one more bit of configuration that I'd like to add to the user-defined attribute that holds the computed percentage. This is a threshold setting that will allow an event to be raised when the session count as a percentage of the maximum goes above a defined value. This will be back in the user-defined polling page. Having selected the percentage attribute and the same device again, I can now select the Events tab. I'll select the threshold mode, pull down the menu of available thresholds for the critical event. None of these is suitable for this requirement, so I'll create a new one and change the display name to Sessions Percentage of Maximum Critical Threshold. There's an existing threshold group called Virtual Private Network, which is suitable, so I'll make this new threshold a member of it. As this is a percentage, I'll indicate that as the unit. Finally, let's use 90% as the default threshold to generate this event. I'll click Select to choose this newly defined threshold setting. Although an event will be generated to warn that the session count as a percentage of maximum has gone above the threshold, it will be a generic user-defined polling event, and a similar event will be generated when it dips back down below the threshold. If I were to add additional threshold settings to give me an early warning of the session count becoming high, I'm going to need to turn these generic events into more appropriate specific ones. This can be done using a couple of rules in the event management system. This can be configured from the administration page. The rules that I need to add will detect when the conditions are right to raise these new events, and the first step will be to create the new events. This is done from the Events tab. I'll click the Add button to create a new event and give it the name VPN Sessions Critical. And I'll set the severity setting to Critical. I could give it a description here, and that would be good practice in production. This dialog also allows me to create a clearing event, so I'll go ahead and do that. Its name will be VPN Sessions Critical Cleared. As I want the indication of excessive numbers of sessions to open an incident, I can also create that incident here. I don't want this incident to time out if the session count remains above the threshold, so the agent will remain set to none. However, the expiry setting defines how long the incident can remain in the closed state and still be reopened if this is an ongoing problem. I'll set that to 1 day. Now it's time to create the rules. This can be done in the Rules tab. I'll place these in their own processing stage, which I'll create in the pre-storage stage and call it VPN. I'm going to change the mode here for the rule processing to finish on the first match, as only one of these rules will ever be valid. I'll add a rule and call it VPN Sessions Critical. I'm going to make this rule conditional on the event being the generic user-defined polling event for the critical threshold, and that it applies to the percentage attribute. The condition setting should therefore be that all tests must succeed. The first test to be added is for the event type, and the appropriate event is selected from the menu. This is the event generated when a user-defined threshold set for the critical setting is passed. I'm going to move it to the right-hand column and select it. The second test is for an attribute. And it's the source external ID attribute that holds the name of the attribute that this threshold was raised against. I'll test that it is equal to the name of that attribute, which I must specify within quotes, and that was UD underscore % max sessions. Finally, I'll add an action, and that's going to be performed if both tests succeed. This action will change the event type, and it's going to change it to the one that I've just created. And that was VPN Sessions Critical. I could update the event severity, but in reality, it will already be at the critical severity setting. The clearing event will also need a very similar rule created. That rule I'm going to call VPN Sessions Critical Cleared. And again, it's going to need 2 tests performing in the condition. In a similar way, the event type is going to need to be chosen. And this time it's going to be the user-defined value abnormality cleared event. The second test is going to be that attribute test. Again, remember that it's in the source external ID. We're going to test for equality, and it's going to be the very same attribute again, which was UD underscore % max sessions. The action is going to change the event type, and this time it will be VPN sessions critical cleared. None of the changes to the event management system will take effect until I deploy them, and that is performed using this button. I'll add a description to remind me what the changes were intended to achieve. Now that the required attributes, events, and incident are defined and populated, they can be used to populate dashboards. That's the subject of another video.